The state government has asked the Economic Regulation Authority to undertake an inquiry into microeconomic reform in Western Australia. This is about trying to find ways in which we can be more productive, more competitive, encourage more investment, but ultimately what it's really about is improving the lives of Western Australian citizens. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce a colleague of mine from the Economic Regulation Authority Board, Professor Stephen King. Stephen's widely experienced in a number of areas, including trade practices, applied microeconomics, regulation and industrial organisation. Currently Professor of Economics at Monash University, he's widely published in a number of prestigious international economics journals, and for 5 years he was a Commissioner with the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission.
This report from the Economic Regulation Authority is the beginning of a policy reform journey that will underpin the future prosperity of Western Australia. Microeconomic reform is all about providing the incentives to encourage innovation and change. Governments, directly and indirectly, affect the incentives that face individuals, businesses, community groups, schools, and indeed everybody in society. Incentives work best when people see the costs and the benefits of their actions without having to be burdened by unnecessary regulation. Through microeconomic reform, the government provides the right incentives while removing the rules and regulations that may help a few but hurt the many. What microeconomic reform does for the wider community, it also does for the government. It makes sure that the government is careful with our taxpayer dollars while investing in initiatives that will make all Western Australians better off. Now, microeconomic reform is not new. The first wave of microeconomic reform in Australia followed the Hilmer Committee report back in 1993. Those reforms have underpinned 2 decades of economic growth in Australia, and that is unprecedented, not just here in Australia, but globally among our competitors. The benefits of this first wave of microeconomic reform were huge. In 1995, the Industry Commission predicted that the benefits from the Hilmer reforms could be 5.5% of gross domestic product. In today's terms, that is about $82.5 billion. The impacts of that first wave of microeconomic reform are still benefiting Australia, particularly the eastern states. In part, these impacts are found in infrastructure, in the interconnected electricity and gas networks, and in the road transport network. In part, they are reflected in reduced bureaucracy and in the elimination of regulations that hurt rather than helped many Australians. But probably the biggest impact was on mindset. When Australians are given the right incentives, we can do amazing things. Let's take Victoria for an example. There was no mining boom in Victoria in the 1990s. The state had Rust Belt declining manufacturing industries and significant financial problems. Through microeconomic reform, Victoria turned its fortunes around. It built a $4.5 billion export industry in education and a $1 billion export industry in dairy. And it provided huge benefits to its citizens and to its business by transforming its energy markets. Victoria's recent growth has only been surpassed by the resource-rich states of Queensland and Western Australia. But if Western Australia is leading Australia's growth rates, why do we need to worry about microeconomic reform? If it ain't broke, why do we need to fix it? With its location close to the heart of Asia, Western Australia should be booming across multiple sectors. And as the Victorian experience shows, with the right incentives, when regulatory barriers are removed, we can get great improvements in innovation and in growth for Western Australia. Does Western Australia need microeconomic reform? Yes. Western Australia needs to adjust to changing demand for our resources, while at the same time providing the incentives that will allow and encourage other parts of our economy to grow and match our resources sector. The government needs to plan for the future. The reforms recommended in the ERA report are a roadmap for the future of Western Australia. This report will help make sure that Western Australia remains resilient in the face of national and international economic change.
Importantly, the state government has recognised that reform is a continuous process. It's not a one-off. We need to continually look at ways to make ourselves more productive and more competitive. Therefore, the state government has asked us to undertake a similar inquiry every 4 years. If we take the Productivity Commission's figure of 5.5% of national GDP and apply that to gross state domestic product, we get a figure of something like $13 billion. So there are significant gains at stake here. Even if the figure is less than 5.5%, there are many billions of dollars here that can be used to improve the lives of Western Australians.